Ever feel like you just need to paint something beautiful without any pressure, no perfect technique, no rules to follow, just that creative calm and permission to paint as you will? That's what happened when I decided to paint these purple coneflowers. After a crazy week, I needed an escape. This isn't about impressing anyone or mastering difficult skills. It's about finding that peaceful flow when brush meets paper and everything else melts away. Sometimes the most healing art happens when we stop trying so hard. Let's play with watercolor. The colors I'm using are Quinacridone Lilac, Permanent Magenta, and then I'm going to play with different yellows and oranges. I have Hansa Yellow Light, Indian Yellow, Hansa Yellow Medium, Hansa Yellow Deep, and Cadmium. I'm using Baohong cold pressed 140-pound watercolor block. It's 10 by 15 inches and I've taped off the section that I'm going to work on. To make a flower petal for a coneflower, or a yellow daisy, or a black-eyed Susan, you want to use a round brush. This one is of Fuumuui. I'm not sure if that's how you say it or not. It's a Fuumuui size 8. It came as part of a set. This particular brush is not super pointed, but it has a little bit of a point. The way the stroke works is you press lightly, then you give some pressure, and then you let off. And if we were to imagine, let me just draw it down here, the cone, and this is where all the seed heads are, which I didn't paint in, I just suggested them. Your petals would be here. Light pressure, hard pressure, let off. Light pressure, hard pressure, let off. And if you're like me, you'll fiddle a little bit. See? Light pressure, hard pressure, let off. I've made a drawing, but it's not everything drawn in because I want to work somewhat intuitively and just go with the flow. I've placed the heads, the seed heads of the flowers where I want them to go, and I've suggested some areas where the petals meet each other, but that's all I'm going to do. I'm starting with the background by using dilute values of the two pinks, wet onto dry, then coming back with darker values of the pinks, wet into wet. Hopefully having sped up this video to 2x won't interrupt your sense of calm while you're watching this. The video was over an hour, so I really did need to speed it up. For the first seed head, I'm first laying down water and then coming back with some of the yellows. As you can see, I've got 3 yellows and 2 oranges. Mostly I'm using Indian yellow and cadmium orange. See how the yellow is bleeding into the background? This is exactly what I wanted, just to let the watercolor flow where it's going to go. Now comes the petal technique that I showed you before. And I'm really not being very exact. I am stroking it perhaps a little quicker than I showed you in the demo. And then I just completely destroyed the shape. But that's okay. This is play. I'm mostly using Indian yellow and cadmium orange. The cadmium orange is the one on the very right. I just love cadmium orange. It is the brightest orange I have ever found. Everything I'm doing is the first layer. I will go back later on with details and definitions. See how the addition of quinacridone lilac and or permanent magenta with the yellows and the oranges makes an even deeper bright orange. Now it'll fade when it dries, but it's a very nice combination. Now I want to deepen the color of these petals because they went on a little lighter than I wanted. So first I used quinacridone lilac and now this is the permanent magenta. At this point I'm working wet into wet. Using a hair dryer to dry the painting real quick. Now we're getting into the second layer. I'm just repeating the same kind of brush stroke that I showed you for the petal demo in the beginning, over and over. Here's a trick I'm using called negative painting. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting out the shape of the petal. You see how there's a light petal between the two darker petals? I'm cutting out that shape. The white line that is forming is going to be the stem. The paper has dried, and I've switched to a small liner brush. This one is relatively expensive. It's by Escoda, but there are other brands of liner brushes that you can use. There's the Da Vinci Casaneo. They make a pointed or needlepoint brush. And then there's the Fuumuui also. I don't have the Fuumuui. I don't know what it's like. From what I've seen, they seem to be very similar to the Da Vinci Casaneo. The difference that I noticed between the Escoda Optimo and the Da Vinci Casaneo, and also with what I've seen other people say about the Fuumuui, is that the way the brush is cut to get that needle point is done differently than they do it with the Escoda brand. Since I have both the Escoda brand and the Da Vinci Casaneo, I can tell you with confidence the Escoda is far superior. I don't know if it's worth 4 times the price, but I can get a much finer point with the Escoda. But, when you're on a budget, I totally get that you're going to have to come up with options. If you noticed earlier in the video, there was a dark color in the palette that I had not introduced in the beginning of the video. This is Indanthrone blue, and it's part of what I'm using to create the shade and the depth in these seed heads. What I've been doing is when I paint the shadow on the seed head, I'm trying to leave some areas where I'm not painting it, so they'll be a little bit speckled. I'm using a combination of Indanthrone blue and Indian yellow. Then I'm coming back with, well, both of the pinks, really. So sometimes I'll use the permanent magenta, and sometimes I'll use the Quinacridone lilac. And that just continues to cause a nice three-dimensional effect. Because I'm not painting in the seed heads, some people will do that. I didn't want to do that. That's why I'm leaving the bare parts of the paper to try to give a sense of texture. I'll be using this technique on each one of the flowers. I could have stopped here. I think this is a nice painting of purple coneflowers. You know what it is. You know what it's about. But I decided to move on and put in some greenery. For the leaves and stems, it's going to be very, very soft and very undefined. I'm starting with a light amount of Indanthrone blue, and I'll come back with yellow to create green. And you'll see I'll go back and forth between adding blue and then adding yellow, and then it's too yellow, and then I add some more blue, and then it's too blue, and I will eventually get it the way I like it. The challenge with this is that I'm getting into negative painting again, and when you do this, you might lose your flow. If you're having a good time, this is where frustration could happen. And if you're not into that right now, even though it can be a good sign that you're learning, don't do it. Here is my imperfect but playful purple coneflowers.